All right, so today we're diving into the work of Friedrich A. Hayek. You might know him from The Road to Serfdom, but we're going a little deeper this time. We're going to be looking at a condensed version that was published in Reader's Digest way back in 1945. And we're also going to look at an essay of his from a few years later called The Intellectuals and Socialism. So what's the mission for today?
Well, we're really trying to unpack Hayek's main argument, understand why it resonated with so many people when it came out, and think about how those ideas apply to the world today.
Right. And I think one of the interesting things about Hayek is his background. I mean, he was this internationally known economist.
Yeah, and spent half his life in Austria, so really close to German thought, and the other half between the U.S. and England.
So he's got this really unique perspective.
Absolutely. And he was writing at a time when, the world was really just picking up the pieces after World War II. There was this widespread desire for stability, this sense of let's prevent another catastrophe.
Let's never let that happen again.
Yeah, exactly.
And it seems like one of the prominent solutions at the time was more government control.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. After witnessing so much chaos, people craved predictability. They wanted a safety net.
It's like a natural human reaction almost.
Yeah.
But this is where Hayek kind of throws a curveball. He argues that central planning, even with the best intentions, can lead to totalitarianism.
Yeah, he uses this really striking analogy. He compares centrally planned economies to barracks.
Oh, wow.
Where you have security, but at the cost of freedom.
It's like trading one for the other in a way.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because to illustrate this, he uses the example of Nazi Germany. And you might think, okay, well, Nazi Germany, brutal dictatorship, what does that have to do with well-intentioned economic policies?
Right. But Hayek points out that even the Nazis, in their early days, implemented things like price controls, supposedly to protect consumers and ensure fairness.
It sounds good on the surface.
Right. It sounds appealing. But Hayek argues that these seemingly benign interventions actually distorted the market, created shortages, and ultimately gave the Nazi regime more and more power over people's lives.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It's like those price controls became a tool for control rather than a safety net.
Exactly.
So it seems Hayek is suggesting that concentrating economic power, regardless of the initial motive, can set a dangerous precedent.
Right.
Now, he wasn't necessarily saying that everyone advocating for central planning was power hungry.
No, not at all.
Right.
He acknowledged that many people genuinely believed in the good intentions behind these policies.
Right.
His point was that the very structure of central planning, the concentration of power in the hands of a few, creates a system where that power can be easily abused.
Right.
And that's where the danger lies.
Okay, so we're starting to see that connection between central planning and this potential for tyranny. But I'm curious, didn't Hayek also believe that this concentration of power leads to a decline in something called the rule of law? What exactly did he mean by that?
Well, think of the rule of law as a safeguard against arbitrary rule.
Okay.
It's the idea that everyone, from everyday citizens to those in government, is bound by a set of pre-established rules applied fairly and consistently. This predictability is what allows individuals to make choices, pursue their goals without fearing sudden random interference from the government.
So it's like a level playing field, ensuring that everyone plays by the same rules.
Yeah.
Even those in power.
Exactly. And Hayek argued that central planning, by its very nature, is at odds with the rule of law.
Okay.
Think about it when you have a central authority dictating every aspect of the economy, from what to produce to how much to charge. It becomes impossible to stick to fixed rules. Things constantly change. And who gets to decide how to adapt those rules?
Like us, those in power.
Exactly. Wow. So the more the government tries to plan, the more arbitrary decision-making becomes the norm.
Yeah.
And that undermines this concept of a level playing field.
And that's where Hayek saw a real threat to individual liberty.
Right. And he felt the shift away from individual liberty was happening in his own time. Hayek witnessed the rise of fascism and socialism in Europe firsthand.
Right. He had a front row seat to all of that.
And he was a rather controversial observation.
Okay.
He argued that many well-meaning individuals, through their support of socialist policies, unknowingly paved the way for the rise of fascism, particularly in Germany.
Now, that's a bold statement. How did he back that up?
Well, Hayek argued that both socialism and fascism, despite seeming like polar opposites, actually utilize similar tactics to gain and maintain control.
Fair.
Think about it. Controlling information, silencing dissent, fostering an atmosphere of fear and intolerance.
Wow, I see the connections he's drawing. So to Hayek, central planning wasn't just an economic model. It was a gateway to tyranny, regardless of whether it was cloaked in socialist or fascist rhetoric.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But Hayek didn't stop there. In his essay, The Intellectuals and Socialism, he delves even deeper into this idea, introducing this concept. He calls secondhand dealers in ideas.
Secondhand dealers in ideas. Okay, now you have to unpack that one for me.
Well,
Who is he talking about?
he was referring to individuals who shape public opinion, but who may not fully grasp the implications of the ideas they're promoting. These could be journalists, teachers, writers, artists, anyone with a platform to influence how people think.
So not necessarily hardcore ideologues,
Yeah.
but maybe well-meaning individuals who kind of get caught up in the popular thought of the day.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to get a little nervous here thinking about who might fit that description.
Well, don't worry, we'll explore this further. But Hayek believed that these intellectuals, despite their good intentions, were particularly drawn to socialist thinking.
Okay.
He felt they focused more on abstract ideals and utopian visions of the future, rather than the practical realities of how societies function.
So they're drawn to the allure of creating a perfect society, even if the means to achieve that perfection could harm individual liberty.
Exactly. And here's where Hayek points out this fascinating irony. He argues that even those who oppose socialism can end up unknowingly spreading socialist ideas.
Wait, how does that work? How can you oppose something and spread at the same time?
Well, Hayek believed it was because they lacked a compelling alternative vision for social progress.
Okay.
They might critique specific socialist policies, but without a strong counter-narrative, they end up defaulting to the language and assumptions of socialism simply because it's the dominant intellectual framework at the time.
So they're constantly playing defense, reacting to the socialist agenda instead of proactively offering a different path forward.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see the depth of Hayek's argument here. He's connecting economics, politics, individual liberty, and even the role of ideas and intellectuals in shaping the course of history.
You got it.
That's pretty profound stuff.
And he doesn't let those intellectuals off the hook. He points out that the very structure of modern society, with its increasing specialization of knowledge and the rise of large, complex organizations, actually gives these secondhand dealers in ideas even more power.
Because they become the interpreters.
Yeah.
The gatekeepers of information for the rest of us.
Exactly.
Wow.
In a world of increasingly specialized knowledge, we rely on others to make sense of complex information.
Right.
We depend on journalists for the news, teachers to educate our children, experts to guide policy decisions.
So these intellectuals, by virtue of their position as communicators, hold immense sway over how we perceive the world and the choices that we make.
Precisely.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. And Hayek argues that if these intellectuals are predisposed to collectivist thinking, it's no surprise that those ideas will continue to gain traction in society.
It's almost like a self-perpetuating cycle. But it can't all be doom and gloom, can it? Hayek wouldn't just leave us with this warning about this road to serfdom. He must have offered some way out, right?
He does. And it's a call to action, particularly for those who believe in individual liberty and a free society. He argues that simply defending the status quo isn't enough.
Because it's not inspiring, it doesn't capture the imagination, or offer a better alternative.
You got it.
Yeah.
Hayek calls for a new, bold vision of liberalism, one that can counter the allure of socialist utopianism.
Okay.
He argues that liberals, and by liberals, he means those who champion individual liberty, need to articulate a compelling and imaginative vision for a free society.
So not just saying no to collectivism,
Mm-hmm.
but painting a picture of a better future.
Yeah.
Based on individual liberty.
Free markets and limited government.
Precisely.
Right.
He says this vision must be radical enough to challenge the status quo and inspire people, but also grounded in a deep understanding of how a free society actually functions.
So it can't just be pie-in-the-sky idealism. It needs to be practical and workable.
Exactly. And it needs to tap into those core values that Hayek cherished. Individual initiative, self-reliance, limited government, the rule of law. That sounds like a tall order.
It is.
But you're right. Hayek is laying down a challenge. He's saying that if we want to safeguard individual liberty and prevent this slide into serfdom, we need to be more than just critics of collectivism. We need to be champions of a truly free society. But how do we actually do that? How do we build that better future that Hayek envisioned? I guess that's what we'll pick up in part 2.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So we've established that Hayek saw this link between central planning and the potential erosion of individual liberty. And he issued this call to action, urging those who value freedom to kind of articulate a better path forward. But what might that path actually look like? How do we go about building this truly free society that Hayek championed?
Well, that's a question Hayek grappled with throughout his work. And, he didn't offer like a precise blueprint. He was wary of those grand schemes. But he did highlight some core principles that could guide us. He emphasized the importance of individual initiative and self-reliance. He believed that individuals, not central planners, were best equipped to make decisions about their own lives.
Makes sense. I mean, it goes back to his concerns about concentrating power in the hands of a few. But wouldn't that lead to chaos? I mean, wouldn't people just kind of exploit each other without some form of regulation or oversight?
Yeah, that's a common concern. But Hayek believed that a free society wasn't about the absence of rules, but rather about having rules that fostered competition, innovation, and individual responsibility.
Okay.
Think of it this way, like a football game. It has rules, but those rules don't dictate who wins or loses. They create a framework for fair play, allowing individual talent and strategy to determine the outcome.
Right. They kind of set the boundaries. So instead of trying to micromanage every aspect of the economy, Hayek believed in setting up a system where individuals could thrive.
Yeah.
Based on their own merits and choices.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But what about things like social safety nets? I mean, wouldn't a truly free society kind of leave the most vulnerable behind?
That's a crucial question. And Hayek didn't advocate for a heartless dog-eat-dog world. He recognized the need for a safety net.
Okay.
But he believed it should be designed in a way that didn't undermine individual responsibility.
Yeah.
Or create dependency.
So maybe something like a limited system of social insurance.
Right.
Rather than a cradle-to-grave welfare state. Something that provides a safety net for those who truly need it, without stifling initiative.
Right.
Or creating perverse incentives.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it. The key for Hayek was to find solutions that empowered individuals, rather than making them reliant on the state.
Right, so it's about striking that balance. This is all starting to make sense. But it also seems incredibly challenging. I mean, it's easy to kind of point out the flaws of collectivism. But building a truly free society, one that balances individual liberty with social responsibility, seems like a monumental task. How do we even begin to shift the mindset? Especially when, as Hayek pointed out, even well-intentioned intellectuals can sometimes unwittingly promote these collectivist ideas.
Yeah, that's the heart of the challenge. And Hayek believed that changing the intellectual climate was essential for creating a freer society.
Okay.
He didn't believe in simply imposing his vision on others. He believed in persuading them, in winning hearts and minds.
So it's not about dictating solutions from the top down, but rather about engaging in open and honest debate, challenging assumptions, and offering these compelling alternatives to collectivist thinking. Okay, but this is where I get a bit stuck. If, as Hayek argued, intellectuals often act as these secondhand dealers in ideas, shaping public opinion, without fully grasping the implications of the ideas they're promoting. How do we break out of that cycle? How do we ensure that the ideas being spread are actually conducive to a free society?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Hayek believed one of the best ways to counter the allure of collectivism was to offer a more compelling and inspiring vision of a free society. He argued that liberals, and by liberals, he meant those who champion individual liberty, needed to be more than just critics of socialism or collectivism. They needed to be proactive, articulating a positive vision of what a free society could achieve.
So not just tearing down the bad ideas, but actively building up the good ones.
Exactly.
What would that look like in practice?
Well, Hayek believed this vision needed to be grounded in a deep understanding of how a free society functions. He argued that liberals needed to emphasize the benefits of free markets, not just in terms of economic efficiency, but also in terms of moral and social progress. He saw the free market as a system that allowed individuals to cooperate peacefully, to innovate, and to create wealth, not just for themselves, but for society as a whole.
Okay, but isn't that the part that often gets lost in translation? I mean, people often focus on the perceived selfishness of free markets. This idea that it's just about individual gain. at the expense of the common good.
Yeah, that's a key misconception that Hayek sought to address. He argued that free markets, while certainly driven by individual self-interest, also fostered cooperation and mutual benefit.
Yeah.
He pointed out that in a free market, individuals can only succeed by providing goods and services that others value.
So it's not a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another person's loss.
Yeah.
It's a system where individuals can thrive by serving the needs of others.
Exactly. And Hayek believed that this system of voluntary exchange, guided by the price signals of the market, was far more efficient and just than any system of central planning.
Okay, I'm starting to see how Hayek's vision of a free society goes beyond just economics. It's about creating a culture that values individual initiative, responsibility, and cooperation. But how do we get there from here? How do we change hearts and minds? Especially when, as Hayek pointed out, the very structure of modern society, with its increasing specialization and reliance on experts, seems to push us towards these collectivist solutions.
That's the million-dollar question. And I think Hayek would say there's no easy answer, no single magic bullet.
Right.
It's an ongoing process of education, persuasion, and demonstrating the benefits of a free society through both argument and example.
So a long game, a marathon, not a sprint. We need to be patient, persistent, and constantly seeking ways to articulate and embody those values of individual liberty and responsibility.
Exactly. And Hayek believed that one of the most important things liberals could do was to offer a vision of a free society that was not only intellectually sound, but also emotionally compelling.
Okay.
He recognized that people aren't swayed by logic alone. They need to be inspired to see a path forward that resonates with their hopes and aspirations.
Oh, we need to be storytellers, not just economists or political theorists. We need to paint a picture of a future where individual freedom flourishes alongside social responsibility, where innovation and creativity are unleashed, and where people are empowered to shape their own destinies.
That's a powerful way to put it. And I think Hayek would agree. He believed that a free society wasn't just about economic efficiency or political freedom. It was about creating a world where individuals could flourish, pursue their dreams, and contribute to a vibrant and dynamic culture.
It's an inspiring vision, but as we've discussed, it's not one that will be achieved easily or overnight. It requires constant vigilance, thoughtful engagement, and a willingness to challenge those ideas and structures that threaten individual liberty.
Absolutely. And I think Hayek would remind us that the fight for freedom is never truly over. It's an ongoing struggle that requires us to be informed, engaged, and committed to defending those principles that make a free society possible. But how can we ensure those principles are passed down to future generations? And how do we address those who simply reject the idea of a free society outright?
Those are questions for another deep dive, but for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned about Hayek's warnings and his vision for a freer future. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the work of Friedrich A. Hayek.
Yeah, we've explored a lot.
His argument about central planning's potential pitfalls, how even well-intentioned policies can lead to these really unintended consequences, the historical context of his work, and this intriguing role intellectuals play in shaping public discourse. But I guess my question is, what does all this mean for us today?
That's the key question, right? What's fascinating is that Hayek wasn't just writing about the threat of like fascism or Soviet-style communism. He was warning against a certain mindset, a way of thinking, that he believed could lead to tyranny in any society, even those that champion democratic values.
It's almost like he's saying, don't become complacent, stay vigilant. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, or something along those lines.
Precisely. And what makes Hayek's work so relevant, even today, is that the appeal of central planning hasn't disappeared.
Right.
It's taken on new forms, adapted to new challenges. But that core impulse is still there.
And that imprints being
the belief that experts can solve complex social problems through top-down control.
Okay. And where do you see this impulse playing out in our world today? What are some concrete examples?
Well, think about the debates surrounding climate change, healthcare, financial regulation, even social media. In each of these areas, there are voices calling for more government intervention, more control, more central planning as the solution.
So those who say, we need to regulate big tech, or we need a single-payer healthcare system, or we need to ban fossil fuels, they're reflecting this impulse toward central planning.
Yeah, in a way. And it's not about saying that these issues aren't important or that those advocating for these solutions have bad intentions.
Right.
The point is to recognize that the same dynamics Hayek warned about, the concentration of power, the erosion of individual liberty, the unintended consequences, those dynamics are still very much in play.
So if Hayek were alive today, do you think he'd be shaking his head in despair, saying, "I told you so"?
I don't think so. I think Hayek was a realist, but he also understood that societies are constantly evolving. I think he'd recognize both the ways his warnings remain relevant and the ways the world has changed. I think he'd be surprised by the resilience of free markets and the adaptability of liberal democracies.
So where does that leave us? What should we take away from this deep dive into Hayek's work?
I think Hayek's work offers this powerful lens through which to view the tensions between individual liberty and collective action. It reminds us that the road to serfdom isn't always paved with ill intentions. It can be paved with good intentions, with the desire for security, with the belief that experts know best.
Right.
And that's what makes it so insidious.
It is a challenge to stay mindful of those slippery slopes, to be critical thinkers, to question assumptions, to remember that even the most well-intentioned policies can have these really unintended consequences.
It is. It is. It's a lot to keep in mind.
Yeah, a lot to unpack.
I think Hayek would urge us to engage in these debates with humility, acknowledging the limits of human knowledge and the importance of individual liberty.
So, no easy answers, no quick fixes, but a call for thoughtful engagement, recognizing the complexity of these issues and holding on to that commitment to preserving individual freedom.
That's the heart of Hayek's message.
Well, there you have it, folks, a deep dive into the work of Friedrich A. Hayek. As always, we encourage you to explore the source material yourself, grapple with these ideas, and form your own conclusions. And here's a final thought to ponder, something we didn't specifically cover, but that builds on what we've discussed. In today's interconnected world, where information flows so freely and technology empowers individuals in these unprecedented ways, are Hayek's warnings about the secondhand dealers in ideas still relevant? Or has the nature of knowledge and communication fundamentally changed the dynamics he described? It's something to think about. Until next time, keep diving deep.